Hello, this is Patrick at OneCNC West, and what we're going to do in this training video is continue to apply toolpath to our turn project. Now, you'll remember in our last video, we applied a roughing operation. If I head over to the NC Manager, I can take my cursor and left-click on the machining operation, and OneCNC gives us a nice preview of the toolpath. In this video, why don't we begin by applying a finish operation. We're going to head over to the Command Manager, select Lathe Toolpaths, and from there, we're going to select Turn Face Finishing. Now, just like with our previous machining operation, we need to select the geometry first that we'd like to apply the toolpath to. Again, notice how the cursor changes to the word Start. That's reminding us that we need to select the start of the geometry that we'd like to apply the toolpath to. So I'm going to take my cursor to the very beginning of that chamfer, and I'm going to left-click. Once I left-click, I get these 4 arrows. Now, the arrows determine the direction of cut as well as the side of the geometry we want to place the tool. Well, I want to move the tool from right to left, and I want it to be on the outside, so I'm going to left-click this arrow. As soon as I left-click that, OneCNC changes the cursor to the word End, and this is to remind us that we now need to select the end of the geometry that we'd like to apply our toolpath to. So I'm going to come up here and left-click. Once we've selected the geometry, we simply right-hand mouse click to tell OneCNC that we're done selecting. Now, the first dialog box within all the machining operations is going to provide the opportunity for us to define our tool. Now remember, for 2-axis lathe toolpath, we always need to select a tool from the library. To do that, you can left-click on the tool graphic or left-click tool changer. Now, I've already selected a tool, but I want to remind you how to access the tool library. So I'm going to left-click. Now we have the very first tab that says Recent. This is a list of recent tools, and you definitely can select any one that you want. Also notice that the tool that's currently loaded within the dialog box is listed in yellow here. So it's very easy to use tools that you've used before, or you can click on the Library tab and select a tool from the tool library. In this example, I'm using a tool that has a 35-degree insert. So with that selected, I can click OK. Once we do that, OneCNC provides the parameters of the tool in the lower left-hand corner here. The name is simply the name of the machining operation. That's what's going to appear over here. We can always modify this if we want to. In fact, instead of Lathe Turn Finish, why don't we call this Lathe Profile? Over here on the right, you have a Notes button. If you click this, you can type in notes, and these notes will appear inside the CNC code. I'm going to click Cancel because we don't need to do that for this. I am going to specify a turret location. This is going to be in turret position number 2. Don't need to worry about the tool offset. Notice how OneCNC defaults that to the turret position. If you want to give this another number, you can always check that and then type in whatever number you'd like. For this example, I'm going to leave it set to 2. We don't need to worry about the coolant or work offset, and that's because the OneCNC post processor is going to automatically output that for us. However, we can always change this if we want later on. For feed rate, I'm using inches per rev. I'm using 5/10. For the spindle speed, I'm using RPM, and the RPM value I'm using is 550. Notice also that OneCNC provides a very handy calculator that you can always use to help determine speeds and feeds. Very nice. I'm going to turn that off. All right, with everything set, let's click Next. The next dialog box provides us the opportunity to control how the tool is going to exit after performing the machining operation. 95% of the time, you can leave this set to no move. Let's click Next on that. Now, there's 2 options here. There's Select Boundary, Select Contour. Just real quick, Select Boundary means that we'd like to contain the toolpath within a rectangular boundary. It's still going to look at the geometry we selected, but that toolpath is going to be contained within a rectangle. We don't need to do that. We're going to leave it set at the default, which is Select Contour, which means that the profile operation's going to be applied to all of the geometry that we selected. All right, very good. All right, now we have Z clearance and X clearance. This works a little bit different than our roughing operation, and let me explain. The Z clearance specifies the Z value, the Z distance that the tool is going to start feeding from along the Z-axis. Now this is positioned relative to that very first piece of geometry we selected. Remember, I selected the very bottom of the chamfer, so whatever Z value I put in here, the tool is going to start feeding that amount. I have 200 thousandths, tool's going to feed in at 200 thousandths and then start profiling. Now the X clearance, that gets applied to the very end of the geometry. So if I take a look up here, after the profile cut's finished, the tool's going to move away in X 200 thousandths, perpendicular, just like that. All right, now let's take a look at the next value, minor X clearance. We don't need to use this right now. This only gets used for facing. Approach clearance, let's talk a little bit about that. I'm going to put in a big number here just to exaggerate what's happening. But approach clearance does this. Remember how Z clearance is going to start the tool path relative to the very beginning of that first piece of geometry? We have 200 thousandths, it's going to feed in 200 thousandths. Well, if I put an approach clearance of 600 thousandths, that gets applied in X along the X axis. So what's going to happen is the tool is going to feed down in X 600 thousandths, and then it's going to feed in Z 200 thousandths and then engage. I'm going to leave these set. Typically you wouldn't have large numbers like that, but let's leave it set to that so we can see exactly what's happening. We're going to click next on that. All right, for cut direction, we're going to use longitudinal, and that's because we're not facing. Let's click longitudinal. Auto simply means that we're going to be using the direction of cut that was determined by those arrows that we selected a little earlier. Remember how we selected that outside arrow that was moving from right to left? This just confirms the toolpath is moving from right to left. We don't need to look at Smart Finish right now. I can show you this a little bit later on in a future video. For nose compensation, you can use automatic, which simply means that OneCNC is going to account for the tool nose radius when applying the toolpath. None means that it's not going to compensate for the tool nose radius of the insert. Instead, it's going to use the theoretical control point. And then, of course, you have your G41 and G42 options. I'm going to go with automatic, which is the default. For number of cuts, let's go with 1 cut. And for the retract clearance, I'm going to put in 100 thousandths for that. Now, the finish allowances, that's if we want to leave material for an additional finish pass, for example. So if I typed in 10 thousandths and then let's say another 10 thousandths here, that simply means that OneCNC is going to leave 10 thousandths in X and Z after the profile operation. I really don't want that, so I'm going to reset these back to 0. All right, very good. Let's click next on that. And then just like with our roughing operation, we can modify the cut to end and cut from start. If we look at cut from start, this is how the insert's going to be treated. If you uncheck that, you can see the difference between the two. You can also specify an additional amount if you want the tool to start a little bit farther away. For example, I might type in 50 thousandths there. Cut to end, look at the difference here of the insert. You can see how it moves back and forth depending on how I select that. And then you can also add an additional amount. How about 50 thousandths? I think all that looks good. Let's click Finish and let OneCNC generate the toolpath. Very good. So here is our profiling operation. Remember how we had 600 thousandths for that approach clearance? Here's that 600 thousandths. Here's the 200 thousandths we specified for the X clearance. And then the toolpath continues along, goes past 50 thousandths, and then moves away perpendicular 200 thousandths. Now that we have some machining operations within our NC Manager, why don't we preview our toolpath? Let's bring back our solid model. I'm going to come down to our layer browser and just left click on the little eye there. And with our solid model displayed, I'm going to go back to our toolpath group called main spindle. I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to select preview toolpaths. And now you can see our first tool performing the roughing operation. While the toolpath is being previewed, you can rotate. Of course, you can zoom in and zoom out, as well as pan. So there's our first tool. After that, we're going to switch tools to the 35-degree insert, and then perform our finish profile operation. All right, that's it for this training video. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.